Okay. Again, my name is Sunny Summers. I'm the Senior Policy Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Today's webinar is being hosted jointly by ODA and the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. We are pleased to have Sarah Rue with OR-OSHA. I think it's OR-OSHA. I always get a little confused when you end up with Department of Consumer Business Affairs. And she is going to present on ag labor housing. So this presentation will be available at a later date. I would appreciate it if everybody could keep their phones or computers or whichever electronic your device you're using to access this webinar on mute so that we can all hear Sarah. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sunny. Good morning, everybody. So I had spent the past couple years working for OR-OSHA as a compliance officer. And because I speak Spanish, I focused a lot of my work on the agriculture industry, including doing just a lot of ag labor housing inspections. I'm currently in our technical team. The technical team here interprets the rules. So we put out publications and pamphlets and posters and whatnot, and we answer questions from growers, from employers, and from the public about how to apply our various rules. So what I want to talk to you today is about our rule for ag labor housing. I want to talk about the registration process and some of the more commonly cited violations so that you guys can know what to do with your housing. I understand that housing is probably new for some of you, or the realization that your housing needs to be registered with OSHA, OR-OSHA, and it needs to follow certain basic rules. As we go on, feel free to jump in with your questions. I think it might be best to deal with questions as they come up, rather than save them to the end. Although, if the question isn't super on topic, maybe we will save those ones for a Q&A at the very end, okay? Jump in during the chat, and if anybody would just let me know if there's a question in the chat, or just jump in, raise your hand, or politely step in, that's okay with me. So for starters, OR-OSHA has kind of a neat, unique relationship with housing. This is the only time when OSHA or OR-OSHA will be involved with the house or where people live, or in this scenario where housing is provided in connection with employment. So who does the rule apply to? Well, it applies to everybody that I just stated. If housing is provided, thank you. If housing is provided in connection with employment, then the labor rule applies. So federal OSHA has a standard for temporary labor camps, and because we are a state-run plan, we have to have a rule that's at least as effective as federal OSHA's rule. We passed our own. OR-OSHA can choose to adopt federal rules or pass their own. We have our own standard. It's an Oregon Administrative Rule 437004. That means it's in Division 4 Agriculture 1120. So we're going to be in that section of the rule 1120 today, and I'm going to show you guys where to find it, okay? So your housing, it can be given to workers free of charge to live in while they work for you. It can be leased or rented to workers. The rule applies though, so long as there's this connection with work. If they're just renting from somebody but not working for them, the rule wouldn't apply, okay? Do you have any questions about, does this rule apply to you or not before we move on? So then the next step would be registering your housing. What do you need to do to register your housing? And the first step is a no-fee consultation from OR-OSHA. You can request that consultation by calling your local field office. Sunny, can I share my screen?
You should be able to, yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go for that right now. Are y'all looking at this Word document?
Yes, it's a little small.
Is it? Okay. For my end, it's gigantic because it's on a big wall monitor.
I would just bump up the sides a little bit down at the bottom.
Like so?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so the first step is a free consultation, which you can request from your local field office. I would love to share this document with anybody who wants it. So if you want to drop, maybe email Sunny, or I don't know what, I can send it to you if you send me your email. I hyperlinked all of this information so that you know who to call or how to contact us. You need to have a consultation the first time you have housing done. And if there's been a lapse in registration, so let's say you register in 2015 and you don't register again until 2022, you need to have another consultation done. You also need to have a consultation done if there's been substantial changes, a remodel, or anything like that, okay? After you have your consultation done and after you've corrected any items that the consultant told you needed correcting, you will get a consultation report and you can file the application for registration, which is on our website. Please give us 45 days before occupancy. Please send us that registration at least 45 days. However, if you are in a time crunch, the best thing to do is contact our ALH coordinator, Kate Ryan. Her information is also linked in this document. If you want though, let's go ahead and I will paste it into the chat so that you have a way to get a hold of Kate easily. Give me just a second. Okay, so contact Kate Ryan if you are in a time crunch and you need to get that registration certificate quicker, okay? And she can help you work through that. Now, does anybody here provide H2A housing? So if you do provide H2A housing, we only have one rule, okay? It's 1120 in Division 4. The rule applies. You must be completely compliant to a T with the housing rule. But if you have questions about that process, maybe that's just in addition to housing, I would go ahead and contact Dora Herrera. She is the Foreign Labor Certification Program Coordinator at the Employment Department, and she can help you out. And again, I have her contact information. And I think at the end, what I will do is share all of this information with you. All right, so you have your pre-occupancy consultation done. You've done your registration certificate, and Kate mails and emails you a copy of the certificate. You post it. Now your workers can come live there. So when would you see OSHA? Why would you ever see us come to site? There's two reasons why we might show up to inspect your housing. And that would be if a complaint has been made, and the complaint could be made by a worker, somebody associated with the worker, or it could be made by like a labor advocacy group. Or we would show up because you showed up on our scheduled list for inspections. Housing shows up about every 3 years, maybe a little bit more than that, okay? So you should expect, if you're providing housing regularly, you should expect to see us every so many years, okay? Just because you showed up on the list, that's all. All right, let's talk about some commonly cited citations. And I want to show you where on our website you can find this information. So we are going to start by going to our homepage, osha.oregon.gov. I'm going to go ahead and click through my hyperlinks. Tell me if they're not working, okay? This information is so valuable, and I always encourage employers to go through and read through our reports so you can see some of the commonly cited violations so that you can be prepared so it doesn't happen to you. Here's our homepage. Sunny, can you see that? Or are you still shared just with the Word document? Okay, so right in this middle column resources, we're going to click on reports and statistics. Under Oregon reports, we're going to click on workplace safety and health reports. I'm sorry, underneath that, we're going to click on top 25 violations. We could go in and dig a little deeper into different industries, but we're just going to focus on the top 25 in ag labor housing. On this page, we'll click the top 25 violations report and run the report. Let's go ahead and click select 2019 because COVID has made things a little bit wonky at Oregon OSHA. So we'll select a previous year. Category type can stay just both. Let's go ahead and select as an industry, agriculture, labor, housing. You don't need to enter the NAICS code there, and let the report run. All right, this might be a little bit hard to see because even for my eyes, this is hard to see. How is the font for you, Sunny?
Tiny.
Okay, all right. Well, so then let's go ahead and turn that off for just a second. If you run it, it would be super valuable to you, to you employers, because you could see which Oregon administrative rule was cited, or federal rule if we've adopted it. You can see the penalty, and you can see how many times it's been cited in that year. So in the report that I ran, the most commonly cited violation was subparagraph 16, living areas for agriculture, labor, housing, with a total penalty amount of $182,000. Now, that was spread over 40 violations. Nonetheless, that's a lot of money. So if I were an employer, I would be digging in these reports all the time. And then I would go through each section of the rule and determine how are we doing on that subparagraph of the rule. So let's go ahead and jump into subparagraph 16 of the rule. And I will show you how I get there as well. Give me one moment and I'll share this again. All right, so from our homepage, osha.oregon.gov, you can click on rules on the green banner at the top, or you can click under common resources on rules and laws. We're going to go into Division 4 agriculture right here. We're going to scroll down to subdivision J, which is where ALH is found. And then within this, I'm moving fast because I'm in here all the time, but specifically we're looking for 1120 agriculture, labor, housing, and related facilities. I'm going to open that. And then in this report, it told me that subparagraph 16 was the most commonly cited standard in whatever year I selected. I can't remember, 2019. So let's go ahead and scroll through to subparagraph 16. All right, so you can see on this left side of the page, sub 13, subparagraph 14, 15, subparagraph 16, living areas. All right, the first rule states that you must keep all living areas safe, in good repair, structurally stable on their foundation. They must provide shelter for the occupants against the elements and protection from ground and surface water, rodents, and insects. So I'm going to share with you a picture of something that is, can you see this picture, Sunny?
Yep, everything's coming through really well.
Thank you. This, believe it or not, is not far off from the truth. We have cited an employer in my time at OSHA for workers living in burned out trailers. And I mean, just like this, smoke damage on the wall. The ceiling of the trailer I'm thinking of was burned through, so there was holes. It was like a skylight to the skies. And just really terrible conditions. This is not a picture from the inspection. All the images are from common, which website? Creative Commons images, okay? So they're all copyright free, can be shared. So this isn't a picture from the inspection, but I wanted to share it because it's not a joke that there are employers who would pull out any kind of structure they can and leave their workers in them. But this clearly offers no protection against the elements. Something like this, an old shed, it's meant for tools. It's not meant for humans to be working in it, okay? So it needs to be structurally sound. It needs to provide protection from all those things that we mentioned, weather, bugs, insects, etc. Let's go back into the rule for 16 and read a few more of the requirements. So this report catalog that I'm sharing with you, it tells me subparagraph 16. It doesn't tell me the subparagraph within 16. So I don't know which of these was cited, but I think it's valuable to go through a couple of the major ones so that you see a few of the big things that commonly get caught, okay? So obviously that trailer is not a good example of a living area. So there's some information here about heaters. Let's scroll through that. Heating elements, provide screens of at least 16 mesh on the doors and windows of the living area, tight fitting, in good repair, and self-closing. So the purpose of this is twofold. It would be to keep bugs, rodents, and insects out, and also allow the workers to leave these open for ventilation. What else? Provide beds, bunks, or cots for each occupant and storage, suitable storage facilities. If you use foam, it has to be a bit thicker than 2 inches. Foam must be covered. Mattresses may not be on the floor or ground. The sleeping surface needs to be at least 12 inches above the floor. We see this commonly. Now, it is one thing if your workers rearrange their beds and mattresses. It is one thing if that happens, but it is another thing if what you have provided them is a bunch of mattresses on the ground. That would not be acceptable, okay? So if your mattresses are uncovered, you have to have them fumigated at the start of each occupancy, okay? If your mattresses are covered, you need to clean them at the start of each occupancy. I would recommend covering your mattresses and cleaning them. Space your beds. All right, within this, we also get our square footage requirement. If it is a studio situation, cook, live, and sleep all in the same room, your workers need at least 100 square feet per occupant. If it's not, then here's the square footage rule. Workers need 50 square feet if they're in single beds. If they're in bunks, you must provide 40 square feet per occupant, okay? And we only count the square footage of areas with ceiling heights of 7 feet or taller, okay? All right. So we talked about that commonly cited rule, the living area. I want to go ahead and scroll back up in the rule to talk about the ground and site requirements. Let's see where it falls on here. So site requirements is the second most common cited violation. It's a pretty low penalty. You'll notice 28 violations for a total dollar amount of $18.60. Nonetheless, let's talk about some of the things that might trip you up. I'm going to scroll all the way back up to sub 6. Okay, so the grounds have to be free from wastewater, sewage, garbage, recyclable material, noxious plants, etc. You must cut weeds, grass, brush back at least 30 feet from the buildings. So something like this during occupancy would not be okay. Those little casitas look like they're in decent repair, short of some worn off paint on the one side, but the brush and whatnot would have to be cut back 30 feet. And this would serve 2 purposes. 1, it's fire protection, and 2, just the brush is just a great breeding ground for insects, rodents, mosquitoes, etc. There has to be adequate drainage. The site can't be subject to flooding. You have to dispose of wastewater. Prevent or control the breeding of mosquitoes, flies, and rodents within 200 feet. Let's talk about electrical for just a minute. So So there's just a few requirements in 1120. When I say 1120, I'm referring just to this housing portion of the rule. There's just a few requirements about electrical issues. One of them is right here. It says that, yeah.
I'm not seeing your screen now. I'm seeing 2 or 3 things overlapping each other.
Thank you, Sunny. I'm going to go back to the rule. Can you see the rule?
Your Teams is overlapping it.
Oh, so let's go ahead and minimize my Teams. How about that?
No, I think you'll need to stop sharing and then start fresh.
Thanks, Sunny. All right, let's do this one more time. How's that?
Still not working on my end. I'm looking at you, Amanda. What's it looking? Yeah, okay. It's not working on her end either.
Oh, interesting. All right, one more time.
It probably just froze up.
I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute. Let's talk for just a second, and then I'll reshare that. What are you seeing right now? Just the Teams?
Teams, and then the Word document behind it.
Oh, the Word document. Okay. All right, let's open my share tray. I have one screen available to select. All right.
Yeah, it never stopped sharing. So maybe I'll try to take over share. In the meantime, there is a question in the chat.
All right, let's go ahead and jump to that question. Let me hop over. All right, if the farm has a single home residence, single family residence on it, that's occupied by the farm manager, that happens to be the property owner and business's son, do they need to go through getting the housing registered? No. And in fact, thank you so much for that question, because there are a few registration exemptions. One is if they're all members of the same family, the housing doesn't need to be registered. 2, if they are unrelated, but there's 5 or fewer people living there, your housing does not need to be registered. And 3, if they're not performing work on agricultural crops, so crops for sale, then they don't need to be registered. Does that clarify? Do you have any more questions about that? Who is exempt from registering? Okay.
They say wonderful, thank you.
Awesome.
And while you're getting ready to share your screen again, I was able to upload the document, the Word document that you've been sharing to our website.
Sweet.
So that link is now in the chat for folks who want to look at it on their computer. And again, when we're done with the webinar, it'll be loaded to our website as well.
Okay, thank you, Sunny. I'm hoping that now if I share, I can share with you. Let me go ahead and open my report. I'm sorry, the report catalog was too small to view, wasn't it? Well, let's just go ahead and stop sharing one more time and then open the tray and go to my desktop. All right, what do you see?
It is not sharing anything of yours.
No. All right, let's work off the Word document. How about that?
Nope, but I can share it from my side.
Would you do that? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
While you do that, Sunny, I'd love to talk a little bit about the financial penalties, the violations that violations sometimes get. Did you guys know this is not decided? The dollar amount is not decided by how grumpy the OR-OSHA compliance officer is. It's set in statute. It's in our Division 1 rule, and in the link that Sunny shared in that Word document, that table is found at the bottom, towards the bottom of the document under paragraph 4. So violations are rated by probability and severity, all right? And then within that, the violation will get a penalty. You can look over it yourself. But we do not just pull those numbers out of the hat. And they're definitely not related to just how mad we are at the time. But let's just go for the big ones. The most expensive penalty you would see as an employer or a housing operator or a grower would be for a willful violation. So willful is when the operator knows of the hazard and willfully ignores it and exposing their workers to the hazard anyway, okay? So when you hear stories in the news of so-and-so being fined $20,000 or something like that, it would certainly be, if we are in the state of Oregon, it would certainly be because of a willful violation, okay? Because when there is a willful, we take the penalty amount and we multiply it by 25. So that's when you're gonna see things in the tens of thousands, unless of course the employer just happens to rack up dozens and dozens of violations. But generally those expensive ones are gonna be willful. All right, so site requirements we've talked about, keeping your grounds free of wastewater and brush and rodents and bugs and whatnot, and cutting the brush back 30 feet. We've talked about the living areas and cleaning your mattresses before occupancy, providing screens on doors and windows. Let's talk about laundry for a minute. So laundry, you must provide a washing tray, tub, or machine for every 30 occupants, okay? That's not super strict. I know sometimes it's difficult to provide laundry because of issues related to water and whatnot, but the rule simply requires this base requirement of 1 per 30 people. It doesn't have to be a machine. It can be a tray or a tub. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Laundry trays and scrub boards and whatnot are very uncommon. I'm not certain I ever saw them when I was doing inspections. Laundry tubs, I can think of them being more common in other countries. I'm not sure how common they are here. I rarely saw them. I would see utility sinks on occasion, but I also didn't see them very often. You must provide hot and cold water for the laundry. All right, for drying facilities, a dryer, the machine is not required, but if you don't provide a dryer, you must provide facilities where they can dry their clothes. So clotheslines are acceptable if it meets the needs of the workers. So in the summertime across all of Oregon, a clothesline outdoors likely meets their needs, right? Because it's hot and it's sunny and we don't get a lot of rain in the summer, and likely everybody could get their clothes dried in an adequate amount of time. If we're talking about the west side of the mountains through a rainy season, an outdoor clothesline will not suffice. It would absolutely have to be covered. And at a certain temperature, workers would need like an indoor clothesline because it would just take too long for them to dry. It's going to be a little bit subjective with your clotheslines, indoor and outdoor, but you just need to assess it and determine, can they adequately dry their clothes with what you've given them. That is a pretty common violation as well. All right, any questions? Oh, slop sinks. So our rule requires a slop sink in the common use laundry rooms, and a slop sink would be like a utility sink. So sometimes we have operators ask us about like bathtubs. Would a bathtub suffice for something like that, either for washing laundry or is that slop sink or utility sink? And the answer is no. The workers are always welcome to use their own bathtubs to do as they please. So if they're running laundry in the washing machine or in the dryer and their child had an accident in the night, or the puppy, I don't know, I'm just throwing out whatever, and they had a need to wash something like bedding, they're welcome to throw their sheets and soak them in the bathtub, but that cannot be your provision for laundry. So how they use that bathtub is up to them, but you have to provide washing and drying facilities as well as a slop or utility sink. And so everybody in this meeting knows, we are in the process of looking at our ag labor housing rule and determining what updates are necessary. And even just some things like these funny terms we use, we will look at updating to make them more applicable to today, because most people say, what on earth is a slop sink? Let's go ahead and talk about toilets.
So real quick before you get there, we have a question. Do you have to register housing if you have 5 or fewer workers?
Thank you for that, Kim. And the answer is that no, you do not. So and I'm going to go ahead and just put this in the chat box right now. The exemptions for registration are, so 1, all members of the same family. 2, 5 or fewer unrelated workers. And 3, they're not performing work on ag crops. Okay. Okay, let's talk about toilets. I want to leave enough time to talk about heat if possible, and mostly answer your questions. So we get called about toilets a lot. We cite toilets a lot. Toilet facilities have to be within 200 feet of your housing. Okay, and somebody asked and stating that the internet was spotty. What was number 1 again? If the workers in the housing are all members of the same family, you do not need to register your housing with Oregon OSHA. I want to clarify too that the rule still applies. Did you know that? So even if you are not required to register the housing, the rule requirements still apply to housing. It's far less likely we'll ever see the housing if it's not registered, but be that as it may, technically the rule requirements still apply. All right, toilets. This is a big one. Toilets have to be provided in a ratio of 1 for every 15 workers and within each gender. So 1 to 15 for each gender. They have to assure privacy. Toilet rooms have to be ventilated have ventilation according to building codes. So portable toilets, chemical toilets, outhouses, what we call in our rule privies, they are allowed, but they do have to have ventilation. Ventilation does not mean a hardwired fan. Ventilation would be like the vent stack in your bathroom, or in a chemical toilet. They're, as far as I've seen, they're constructed so that the holding tank has a vent pipe. Really important that if you're using those kinds of chemical toilets, that you remind workers, maybe put up signs to leave the toilet lid down. That vent pipe cannot do its job unless that toilet seat is down and then the gas builds up and it exits through the pipe. A question in the chat from Troy: does the employee residence have to be separate from the operational facility? For example, we have a large barn with garage bays, workshop machinery, etc. Is there a problem with workers living in the finished rooms? No, they just have to be away from hazards. So if they couldn't be next to a hazard, but no, that's not a problem. And we do see it on occasion. Okay, so back to toilets. Please, please, please remind your housing operators, remind whoever goes in to clean, remind workers with those chemical toilets. They're not fun. We acknowledge they're not fun for everyone, for anyone. But the way to keep them less stinky and functioning well is to keep that lid down so that the vent in the holding tank can do its job. Let's see. Chemical and portable toilets have to be serviced at least weekly. And these also have to be cleaned at least daily, whether it's a portable toilet, chemical toilet, or a privy, an outhouse. Those have to be cleaned daily, okay? Outhouses, specifically, because of the nature of how they're built, have to be at least 100 feet away from living areas and places where food is prepped or served. All right, so garbage, dumpsters. I wish I could share my screen with you. I've got great pictures. So provide at least a 30-gallon garbage container for every 15 occupants. It has to close, and the lid has to fully close. This is to prevent rodents and bugs from building up right there. Empty those large ones and your bins at least weekly or as often as necessary. All right. I'm going to go ahead and jump back on my end to the report catalog and see if there's any items we didn't touch on that we get a lot of questions about and that we cite a lot. And I think that's actually it for the commonly cited violations. Are there any questions that I could answer before we move on? Okay. You guys want to talk about heat for a minute? The new heat rule. Okay, I'm going to, let's jump into it for just a minute since we don't have a lot of time left, and I wanted to talk to you about some of the ways that you can comply with this new heat rule in housing. So there's a heat rule for the work environment, and there's a heat rule for the housing environment in ag labor housing as well. All right, so the rule says if, there's some ifs in this rule. It's an if-then situation, which I acknowledge can be confusing to read. If the heat rule is triggered, then you must provide a cooling area. So in housing, the heat rule is triggered if it's 80 degrees or more outside and the bedrooms are over 78 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop this into the chat as well, because I think the language of the rule can be a little bit tough for people to get behind. So the heat rule in housing is triggered when it's 80 outside and the bedrooms are 78 or above. We had a quick question in the chat. In our area, we have cannery workers that are provided housing in hotel rooms. Do employers have to register the housing? Do they get inspected? This is such a good question. Let's talk about this for a minute. So, yes, they do. And Diana, the rule says that this ALH rule does not apply to, I'm going to read you the language, and then I'll tell you how we interpret it. The rule says, these rules do not apply to hotels or motels that provide similar housing commercially to the public on the same terms as they do to workers. So there's been a lot of back and forth about how does Oregon OSHA interpret this, and does the hotel you're using fall under these rules? Because there's also other building codes rules and fire marshal rules and whatnot for hotels and motels and lodgings and whatnot. If you provide housing at the hotel in connection with employment, the rule applies. Whether they're paying, the worker's paying, or whether you're paying, the rule applies. Now, if the worker went and got a weekly hotel rate and then went and found work with you and maybe does a little bit of subcontracting, I don't know, with a landscaping company on the weekends, the rule would not apply. So it can be complicated because there can be a lot of gray area about who exactly is providing the housing. But if you are providing the housing, or if those rooms are offered in connection to working at your site, the rule applies. I don't like that that we have it even written right here in the rule, because I feel by saying these rules do not apply to hotels or motels, a lot of people stop right there. They just say, okay, cool, the rules don't apply to hotels or motels. But as you read through the statement that provides similar housing commercially to the public on the same terms, well, that's usually the trigger that this rule does apply, because usually the terms that they offer are different. Usually that worker who's living in that hotel with the rest of your workers couldn't stay there if they quit working for you. So one thing we always ask is, could they stay here on the same terms if their employment ended? If they could, then it doesn't look like the rule applies. Any other questions about hotels or motels and how we look at that? They do get inspected too, by the way. Oh, and you know what? Thank you for bringing up hotels, motels. Hotels and motels have proven a little bit complicated for some things, like, you know how I showed you that picture of the screens and we talked about screen doors and screen windows? Well, obviously an operator or a grower or a farmer doesn't really have the ability to make adjustments to the hotel or motel. Well, often the hotel motel operators are not going to allow any kind of alterations. So we've issued a recent interpretation regarding this issue specifically with screen doors and through screen windows. After consulting with the fire marshal and whatnot, we've determined if adding those screen doors or windows, or another way to say it, if complying with the housing rule causes a greater hazard, we won't cite you for not having the screen door or window. So specifically think about the corridor at a let's say a long motel, it's 2 stories and it's just like kind of like a row house. It's just like a long building in a rectangular parking lot. The fire marshal is not going to want self-closing screen doors upstairs in that corridor because they can't get their equipment down it then. So in a situation like that, we do not expect you to install a self-closing screen door on that hotel or motel room you're using, okay? But only in a situation where you can say complying with the Oregon-OSHA ALH rule causes a greater hazard. It's not feasible. All right. Any other questions before we go back into heat in the housing? Okay, so as I mentioned this in the chat, heat in housing, this portion of the rule is triggered when it's 80 or more outside and the bedrooms are above 78. I'm going to go ahead and on my end click through. The ALH heat rule can be found at the tail end of the housing rule. We link it in a separate document, although it will eventually be merged in. All right. So the rule states, give occupants continual access to one or more common rooms that are maintained at or below a temperature of 78 degrees. So if rooms where people sleep are not able to maintain an indoor temp of 78 degrees or less, using whatever reliable means you can, then you have to provide an area for occupants to cool off whenever the heat index outside the housing unit is at or above 80 degrees. That cooling area has to be big enough for at least 50% of the occupants to use at a time. So how are you going to comply with this heat rule? You can provide them an indoor cooling area, or you can provide them an outdoor cooling area. Pretty obvious, the indoor cooling area would almost always include like a window AC unit, a portable AC unit, or I don't know, maybe there's a building with AC, I don't know. Or maybe it's just a super well insulated building on the coast and the internal room doesn't ever get that warm, so they could use that as their cooling area. Most housing though doesn't have an extra rooms, empty rooms they're not using. Most housing, I mean, we're in a bit of a crisis with housing, and most housing is just completely used. So what I am seeing is where possible, growers are putting like a portable or window unit in, say, the living room, and that's the cooling area. There is also the option to use an outdoor cooling area. I'm sorry, I forgot. I need to throw this into the chat for you. So the heat rule in housing is triggered when it's 80 or more outside and the bedrooms are over 78. So option 1 is to provide an indoor cooling area that can maintain 78 or less. Usually with window AC units, or if you're on the east side of the state, swamp coolers. Option 2 is to provide an outdoor cooling area. Okay, what does that outdoor cooling area have to have? It has to be shaded. And then there has to be a second element. The rule says to provide water misters, cooling vests, cooling towels, or equally effective means of relief. So shaded, and then the addition of something that is cooling. So an example I'll give you is a grower called me the other day and said that they have a creek running through the property and it's fully treed. And right now the workers go and just put their chairs in the creek. And does that count? Would that qualify? And the answer to that question is yes, as long as the creek doesn't provide or cause a hazard. As long as the creek isn't hazardous, or as long as whatever solution you're using isn't hazardous, then yeah, that absolutely qualifies. I would say the Willamette River is not acceptable. It's too swift, there's deep parts, we have drownings every year. I would say that's not acceptable. But if we are talking a shallow creek, absolutely that would be acceptable as a cooling area. A shaded cooling area with a breeze sounds nice. And, excuse me, I'm seeing growers who have large eaves on their homes or their casitas. I'm seeing them simply install like those garden misters because the eaves are such that chairs will fit fully shaded under the eaves. And then you can install just one strip of garden misters and you can meet the intent of the rule that way. What else am I seeing? Yeah, I mean, it's AC or swamp coolers where possible, some misters and shade outside, and then these little rare gems where they have this idyllic little calm creek trickling through. Okay, questions before we finish up today? Everybody's been quiet and so patient. I appreciate it. Okay, so I really appreciate everybody coming today, and I think the big thing is to remember is just to call us. Call us if you have questions. Call Kate Ryan or email Kate Ryan if you need your registration pronto, if you're up against a time crunch. Call the technical team if you're not sure how you're going to comply with the rule. If you're really struggling because of, say, infrastructure issues, gosh, I don't know how I'm going to do whatever. I don't know if this qualifies. Call our consultation team at your local field office and they can come check it out. Consultation is free of charge. It's confidential. They can't cite you. And they're ready to help anytime.
We had a question in the chat. What are the requirements for food access, kitchens, refrigerators, food storage?
Diana, that's such a good question. I'm going to jump over to the rule and just read you the highlights of it. So currently, kitchens are not required, but there are rules for when you provide it, you must meet the following requirements. So for example, we allow hotels and motels, even though they don't have kitchens, right? Or they have a portion of a kitchen. Let me go ahead and open this up for you. One second. Okay, so there has to be a fridge. It has to keep food at or below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. When provided, you have to provide 2 burners for every 10 people. There's some requirements, like if a gas or electric hot plate or wood stove is within 18 inches of the wall, then that wall has to be made of finished, cleanable, non-absorbent, grease-resistant, fire-resistant material. There's some requirements like that. No gas tanks used inside. Things have to be installed, plumbed, wired, piped correctly for safety. Okay. I do see a lot of times though, like outdoor cooking areas that use propane or whatnot. Okay. Let's see, food storage shelves, food prep areas, food contact surfaces, etc. have to be made of a smooth, non-absorbent, cleanable material. But really the only requirement for those kitchens is that there be a fridge and a stove or hot plate in working condition. There's requirements like it has to be clean and whatnot. So fridge and stove or hot plate in working condition. Pretty bare minimum basic when provided. This is something that we talk about a lot because there is so much room here in the rule for improving this. Let's see. Sunny mentioned in the comments she's corrected the file so that the links are working. And then there was another question. How does housing work as part of compensation for labor? Thank you for that question, Troy. That is a really good question. I think that would be more for Boley than me. I don't know. If you provide housing for free, I don't know what it is legal to then pay your workers because of minimum wage rules, and now we have overtime rules in agriculture. I actually don't know how compensation works or the legalities of that, but I would encourage you to get a hold of Bureau of Labor and Industries or an employment lawyer or whatnot to determine that. And Shannon asked for that last page up. Shannon, can you tell, was that like the Word document or was it part of the OR-OSHA rule on the website? Since my sharing hasn't been great, my screen sharing.
I think it was this one. I had it up.
Okay.
And for Shannon, I got to it from the Word document that we have linked in the chat, and I clicked on living areas, and then I scrolled down. Sorry if I'm making folks nauseous, to the kitchen sections. So common use cooking and eating facilities, etc.
Are you guys all a part of our rulemaking advisory committee? I think I recognize a handful of names in here, but if you're not and you would like to attend those meetings, right now they're held just virtually through Teams or Zoom or whatnot. We are discussing the rule, the housing rule, potential changes, and also potential roadblocks to changes. We all know infrastructure in agriculture is incredibly difficult to deal with. Water accessibility, electrical accessibility, drainage, whatnot. These things are all really tough to deal with, and those are the things we're talking about. We normally meet monthly. This month we are not meeting. We will regroup in September. But if you're interested in that, go ahead and just shoot me an email. I'm going to drop my email right here. And you can, and I'll then send you invites to the Ag Labor Housing Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings. So what I'm seeing with hotels, motels, and kitchens, for those interested, is I see a lot of times where the grower or the farmer or the operator needs a whole block of rooms. And so sometimes what they will do is, depending on the number of workers, they will take over an extra room and turn that into the laundry room. So there's multiple washers and dryers. They will take over a room and turn it into a kitchen, because whether or not kitchens are required in the rule, most operators, farmers, growers, etc., have a provision for food. Otherwise, they can't get workers to come work for them. Sometimes it's a cash allowance. Sometimes it's the provision of one person who will cook for the group. Sometimes it's a food truck. None of them are probably a perfect solution, but agriculture employers are in a bit of a bind. I mean, to tell you the truth, our labor crisis is affecting all industry, but with agriculture, it's been particularly difficult, and employers are having to really push hard to get workers. So anyway, whether or not the kitchens are required, I'm seeing this provision of food, whether it be like I said, cash allowance, or they'll hire somebody to come in and cook big meals or whatnot, provide a food truck or two. Okay, it's just about 11. I didn't touch on heat in the work environment nor the new smoke rules. I am available if anybody wants to send me an email, or you can call our technical team. And let me drop the number to the Salem office so that you can talk to technical anytime you have questions. But really, most importantly, get that call consultation for that free on-site consultation if you've never been registered before. If there's been a lapse in your registration, get a hold of Kate Ryan. Her information was above. If you need help getting registered quick, if you're in a time crunch, the rule says 45 days, guys, but you can call us and work with us, and we'll accommodate as best we can to get your housing registered.
And for those who are going to be watching this after the fact, that phone number is 503-378-3272. Also available in the handout that we've been using as well.
One of the most helpful links I put in that handout as well is just the link to our A to Z topic index on our website. If you go to OSHA.Oregon.gov, click on A to Z topics, and then for purposes of what we're talking about today, just scroll down and click on agricultural labor housing. But you could click on anything, be it fall protection or lockout, tagout, or whatever. Then scroll through and you'll find all of our publications, documents, trainings, and rules related to ag labor housing. So much of this is available in Spanish if your workers or your leads, foremen, encargados, whatever, if they are Spanish speaking. So much of this is in Spanish. And also just a request to you, when you see something and you need it in Spanish, will you just always let me know? We've got a great team here working on translating as much as possible. And our goal is to continue to provide better resources in other languages. So would you just let me know, oh, it would be really nice to have this certain thing in Spanish, and I'll pass that along to our education team who works on those documents, okay? So I hope this gave you an idea of the basic requirements. We couldn't go through the rule line for line. You'd never remember it all. It would be boring for us all, and we just didn't have time in an hour. But I hope I showed you where you can go on the website to find the rule, the A to Z index where you can find help. You have phone numbers to call and emails to email when you need assistance. And also, I would hope that you would really utilize that report catalog. And this is as valuable in your production facilities as it is in your housing. Because, okay, maybe the housing violations aren't as expensive as, say, a lockout, tagout violation or something. So go ahead and put in, select manufacturing when you go to the reports catalog and see what those commonly cited violations are, and then go look at your programs and see how you guys hold up or how you measure up to those requirements. And Shannon just asked, lastly, will the video be available on the website? And there's been a bit of a lag with data connection. Shannon, we totally understand that. And I believe Sunny said that yes, it will. But Sunny, go ahead and correct me.
It absolutely will. I'm the person putting it on the website, so give me a little bit of grace if it takes me a couple of days next week to get it uploaded. The other thing I would like to put a plug in, we're talking about housing, and I don't know about you folks, but growing up, OSHA was a little bit of a dirty word. And I've always been really pleased to work with OSHA staff, especially the consultative services. So if you're just so overwhelmed and don't even know where to start on all things OSHA, consultative services is a wonderful program that OSHA provides. They're separate from the inspection staff, so they can come out and help you figure out what it is that you need to get fixed. There's a bit of a firewall between them and the inspection staff, as I understand it. So if I ever had to run a business, I would be on the phone with consultative services. And as Sarah put in the chat, it is free of charge and confidential. So anybody I talk to that may be subject to OSHA regulations, I try and remind them that service is available.
And I'm just dropping the link right here for our office locations, because each field office has an enforcement side and they have a consultation side. So wherever you exist in the state, call your local field office. You can click that link right there and find your local field office or your nearest and ask for consultation. And there absolutely is a firewall between the two, between the enforcement side and the consultation side.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. I know Friday morning's not the most interesting time to talk about ag labor housing, but we appreciate your time. And yes, this video will be available on the ODA hemp website, and I think OLCC may link to it as well. So with that, have a wonderful day. And if you have other ideas for information that you need that you haven't been able to get, webinars that you'd like ODA or OLCC to host, please let me or Amanda know and we can set that up for you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.